Jon Stewart, whose real name is Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz, has returned to The Daily Show. We have this article here from the New York Times. Now, where was I? Jon Stewart is back in his old Daily Show seat. Apparently, the ratings are skyrocketing because of his return, and just in time for election season. You know, these people are having a problem controlling the narrative. They are having a problem controlling the flow of information and where people are going to get their information when it comes to political matters, especially during election year. And this is a very, very sad attempt at regaining at least part of that control. But they know that older Gen Xers, some boomers, of course, used to love to tune into The Daily Show to get their political insight, to get their political information, especially during the election season. And so they're gonna grab the attention of millions of people. They're gonna grab the attention of at least some of the people in America, the more vapid ones, of course. So we're gonna talk about this today. There was one clip that came out from this new show, this new Daily Show with Jon Stewart back, where he basically claims that the reason we can't have clean streets and clean train stations like Russia is because we have freedom in America. And so we're going to address that. We have a couple of other clips to play for you guys, as well as some history on Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz. So we'll get to all of that and more next. Before we do, I just want to thank this video sponsor. This video has been kindly sponsored by you, by us, by this show. As we've talked about in the past, we've been canceled. We've been canceled basically everywhere, canceled on most of the mainstream social media platforms. Our sponsors of the show over the years have been attacked by the mainstream media and have gotten cold feet. And so we need your support in order for the show to continue. The best way to support is on Subscribestar. The Subscribestar.com/Vincent-James. $2 a month, $5 a month. You get access to exclusive content, and you get to support the show consistently. We've also got preparewithvincent.com. You can get a 25-year shelf life dry food supply, and we get a substantial portion of every order from that website. So make sure to check out preparewithvincent.com. 25-year shelf life dry food supply. We've got a 4-week supply up there. We've got a 3-month supply up there. So make sure to check it out. Links are in the description below. And if you're not watching on Rumble, make sure to subscribe on Rumble. Daily Veracity with Vincent James. So let's get to this article here. This is from the New York Times. Now, where was I? Jon Stewart is back in his old Daily Show seat. It says, Jon Stewart returned as host of The Daily Show. The Comedy Central news satire he turned into a cultural force. It was the beginning of a plan announced in January that will bring Stewart back to the show on Mondays through the presidential election. Now, they replaced him with Trevor Noah. That was kind of like successful for a time, but mostly a failure. And, this is, again, a very sad attempt at trying to regain control of at least part of the narrative when it comes to political topics leading up to the 2024 election. Quote, we're going to have so much we're going to talk about this year, Jon Stewart said. Obviously, the elections, of course, obviously the elections. And if you watch some of his recent clips, some of his recent shows, they're just basically all attacking Trump, which is exactly what he was brought back to do. Now, the ratings have exploded since Jon Stewart returned. It says Jon Stewart's Daily Show return sparks a ratings blast from the past. I believe it said something to the tune of 930. Here it is. But people tuned in nonetheless last week and even more so this week. Stewart's first night back drew 930,000 viewers on Comedy Central, a number that expanded to 3.6 million viewers when 3 days of encores streaming on Paramount Plus and Monday night simulcasts were included. For perspective, that half-hour premiere was the number one most watched cable show during that time slot. So, Jon Stewart, Jonathan, or shall we call him Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz, went on his news show to not only blast Trump, but to also blast Tucker Carlson, who is, or at least who was, the most watched cable news host until Fox News fired him. Now he has his own show, and he did an interview with Putin, with Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia. I'm sure a lot of you guys tuned in for that. It got over 100 million views, or something like 200 million views. And so Jonathan Stewart took the time to attack Tucker Carlson and claimed that the reason why we can't have clean streets and clean train stations like Russia does, as Tucker Carlson pointed out when he was there, is because America has freedom. Take a look at this clip.
Right. Because the difference between our urinal caked chaotic subways and your candelabred beautiful subways is the literal price of freedom. But the goal that Carlson and his ilk are pushing is that there's really no difference between our systems. In fact, theirs might be a little bit better. The question is, why? Why is Tucker doing this? Here's why. It's because the old civilizational battle was communism versus capitalism.
Yeah, we can't have clean subways and we can't have clean streets, and we can't walk down the street without seeing graffiti on the walls or seeing someone shitting right there by a curb or seeing migrants attack police or anything like that, is because of the literal price of freedom. Because America's so free. That's interesting. Talk to anyone older than 50 years old, older than 60 years old, and they seem to remember clean streets, clean sidewalks, the Golden State of California actually being the Golden State. They seem to remember clean train stations. My uncle, for instance, he wanted to come out here and see us, and he lives in Washington. He lives near Seattle, and we're in Idaho. And he wanted to come out here and see us, and he wanted to take the train to come and see us because he didn't want to drive, he didn't want to fly, he doesn't want to deal with the hustle and bustle of the airport and so forth. And he decided to take a train. I told him, don't take the train. It's going to be hell. The trains probably aren't as you remember them to be. And he was talking about how he used to ride, and it was called the Empire Builder. This is what this train was called, the Empire Builder. It goes from Washington to Chicago, where we're from. And he was saying it was nice and it was clean and it was a great train ride and the scenery was beautiful, and he used to take it all the time. He took the train, even though I told him not to and that it wasn't going to be like that anymore. And he said it was the worst experience of his life. The worst experience of his life. First of all, the train was like 8 hours late. So he was, waiting in this cold train station for 8 hours to take the train. And then there were crazy people on board the train, which is exactly what I told him was going to happen. And so it's not because America's free that America's like this. As I say in my tweet here, I'm pretty sure it's because of the diversification of the country and how the country is completely falling apart at the seams, especially when it comes to law and order. And, all of these things that liberals hold dear with their bumper sticker worldview of diversity as a strength. It's because of the promotion of those ideas, of that ideology, that this country is falling apart. And train stations are just one small part of that. But let's watch the rest of this clip here.
That's what drove the world since World War II. Russia was the enemy then. But now they think the battle is woke versus unwoke. And in that fight, Putin is an ally to the right. He's their friend. Unfortunately, he is also a brutal and ruthless dictator. So
now, this is another thing that they say a lot, is that he's a brutal and ruthless dictator. And then, listen, I'm not going to argue that there are some things there, but the thing is that they always bring up the fact that he jails dissidents or he kills dissidents or whatever. It's like, well, doesn't America do the exact same thing? Look at Edward Snowden, for instance. He's hiding out in Russia because America wanted to do that exact same thing to him. Look at what we did to the WikiLeaks founder. That guy is he became like a mental mess because of what the CIA did to that guy. And the list goes on. And the list goes on. Look at what they're doing to the people who just simply walked into the Capitol building to take a piss. As another example, right? And the thing is, though, is that, he's trying to make this thing about communism versus capitalism and the price of freedom and blah, 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 blah. No, here's the thing. Russia, the reason why they hate Putin, the reason why they hate Russia has nothing to do with communism, has nothing to do with the Cold War, has nothing to do with any of this. It's because they are the last great power in Europe that has a foundation in Orthodox Christianity, that has a culture, that has traditions, and they do whatever it takes to protect that culture, to protect those traditions that are rooted in Orthodox Christianity. This is one of the main reasons why they hate Putin so much, specifically. And another thing is that when you look at what Jonathan Stewart said here, let's just go back just a tiny bit.
Ally to the right. He's their friend.
Putin is an ally to the right. Putin is our friend. one thing I said about his interview with Tucker Carlson is that he didn't have to go into like this 30-minute history, this like long history going back to the 1800s of Russia, or mainly pointing out the reason why Russia did what they did in terms of what's happening in Ukraine right now. Because these arguments have been made, right? These arguments have been made on mainstream conservative podcasts. People have talked about how we promised after the fall of the Soviet Union not to move 1 inch east. The reason why NATO existed was to defend against Russia, against the Soviet Union. And once the Soviet Union fell, we promised not to move NATO 1 inch east. And that's all we did. That's all we did since that time, all the way up until NATO is, now literally on Russia's borders, pointing missiles into Russia, and Putin had to do what he had to do to defend his country. All he wanted was a buffer. There was an agreement made. There was an agreement that was already made, and we decided to say F you. We don't care about your agreement. We don't care about the buffer state that you want. We don't care about the space in between us and you that you want. All we care is about what we want. All we care is about what our foreign lobbies want. All we care is about, what our donors want, is basically what it comes down to, and what the military-industrial complex wants. What Putin should have done during that interview is really harped on a lot of things we've talked about on the show, where you have there was a lady in Russia who was arrested. In fact, I could probably pull this up right now. There was some girl who was arrested Russia, or she's like most wanted in Russia for posing topless in front of a so it was a Ukrainian OnlyFans model. Okay, here's the story right here. Ukrainian OnlyFans model who posed topless in front of Moscow's a church in Moscow. This is your liberal, this is your just disgusting, degenerate. These are these people. These are the Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz people on the other side. And so, this is another reason why they call him a brutal dictator who hates freedom. It's like, no, he's regulating morality in order to maintain those traditions, in order to maintain his culture, in order to not devolve or degenerate into this degenerate state. This Weimar state, to prevent what's happening in every Western country. Especially in America. And what he could have talked about was that. What he could have talked about was the fact that, because he bans this sort of degenerate content from TV, especially protecting the children, because he bans the promotion of homosexuality and transgenderism and all of these things in the culture shaper that is content, that is digital content, that is media, the vast majority of the population of Russia has a completely different view on these cultural issues than the American people do. Their view, their worldview is very similar to the worldview of the American people back in 1950, 1960, 1970, all the way up until a decade after the sexual revolution, and all this stuff started to flood TV, and the Will and Grace effect, which we've talked about on the show before. He could have touched on that, and maybe that would have been a lot more effective than going into the history of Russia for 30 minutes. But let's get back to this Jon Stewart clip here. Here's the rest of this clip. Take a look.
Unfortunately, he is also a brutal and ruthless dictator. So now they have to make Americans a little more comfortable with that. I mean, liberty is nice, but have you seen Russia's shopping carts? And Tucker would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those.
And on the Russia shopping cart stuff, like the shopping cart thing was like talking about having to put a quarter in the shopping cart, then you had to return it. This is what Aldi's does, actually. Aldi, I don't know if you've heard of this supermarket before, but growing up, we used to go to Aldi, and it was known as like a generic product store. It was known as, at least in the south side of Chicago, it was known as like the store that middle class to poor families shopped at. We used to shop at this place all the time. And I used to love, growing up as a kid, putting the quarter in the shopping cart, because otherwise the shopping carts would end up all over the place. Homeless people would take the shopping carts, especially in the areas where you had an Aldi. And so we do have this in America. Tucker also went into the supermarket and said, whoa, everything's so cheap here. When in reality, it's really not. Compared, like if you're spending dollars, then yeah, it's cheap to you. But to the Russian people, I mean, they spend like 35% of their income on food, whereas we spend like 7, 8, 9%, 10% of our income on food. Well, I guess it's a little bit more nowadays, but you understand. So of course it's going to be worth a little bit. The dollar is going to be worth a little bit more. You're going to be able to. You have more buying power if you're spending the dollar. So those two things are sort of like neither here nor there. But the train station thing, showing how ornate it was, how clean it was, how. And of course the cultural thing and all these other political topics I think are very, very important. And these are things that Putin could have definitely touched on. But let's go ahead and let this clip play out again.
A little more comfortable with that. I mean, liberty is nice, but have you seen Russia's shopping carts? And Tucker would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling assassins.
In a statement to the New York Times, Carlson said, quote, "It is horrifying what happened to Navalny. The whole thing is barbaric and awful. No decent person would defend it."
Correct. No decent person would.
So there you go. That's Jon Stewart on Tucker Carlson, or I'm sorry, should I say Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz. Of course, changed his last name because he thought that people weren't going to trust him as much if people knew that his real last name was Leibowitz. Listen, I'm not. That's not me. That's him. That's him. And a lot of people actually he said the name was too Hollywood. That's in his words. But his father, Donald Leibowitz, was an energy coordinator for the New Jersey Department of the Treasury. His brother was the chief operating officer at the New York Stock Exchange Euronext, which is the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange. And he also claimed that he experienced so much anti-Semitism as a child. He says he was bullied frequently for being Jewish. This is what he claims, what Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz claims. So it's, this is not like, he represents himself as, I mean, you guys know the character he kind of plays. Everyone knows he's super rich. He comes from a, guy who headed up the New York Stock Exchange, basically. He comes from a family like that, and he just sort of tries to, like, play himself off as, like, for the people. I am a people's guy. I am, like, a populist, like, left-wing populist, blah, 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 blah. The dude's a liar. Yeah, here it is right here. He often jokes that it was because people had trouble pronouncing Leibowitz or it sounded too Hollywood. The dude's a total liar. And, comedy. This might be a comedy skit, but we know that there's a lot of truth to what he says. What he says here. Take a look.
The healing begins. This is why, because the Jewish community and the black community, we should be together. Jews and blacks we shouldn't fight, but there shouldn't be tension. Jews and blacks should get together and get whitey. I think.
And that's the thing, right? That's what has happened over the course of history in this country. I mean, you look at who founded the NAACP, right? Henry Moskowitz, Du Bois. Like, you look at who really founded the NAACP. You look at who was the speechwriter for Martin Luther King. Levison. Who are the people behind the Martin Luther King speeches? What events did Martin Luther King go to? He went to literal Rothschild events. Look at who was like marching behind him with the Torah and so on. And so you look at the treasurer for the Black Lives Matter Foundation, Susan Rosenberg, who was like part of the Weather Underground movement, whose stated goal in one video was to kill all white kids. And Jonathan Stewart, every chance that he gets, Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz, every chance that he gets, he says, we white people, us fellow white people, we have to do better. We, of course, black people hate us as white people because all we have done was destroy. And he goes on with LeBron James, who said all what he said during the whole Black Lives Matter thing, the Summer of Love in June of 2020. And he goes in there and he race baits against white people, and he says, black people should hate white people. We ruin everything. Jews and blacks shouldn't fight. We Jews and blacks should get together and get white. Just watch a lot of the clips that we played a lot of these on the live stream here. Watch a lot of the clips. Watch his rants about white guilt and how he says that he's white. But then when people call him out for his white privilege, he says, well, hold on a minute. I'm not white. I'm Jewish. So it's just so It's just so tiresome. It's so tiresome. So that's Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz. I actually talked about him in my appearance on the Stu Peters show recently. Once again, the survival of the show depends on you. It's actually teetering. It's actually getting quite dicey out there. And so if we can get 1,000 subscribers on Subscribestar, this would help to make sure that the show continues long into the future. A lot of you guys know I've been around for years, and they're doing everything that they can to attack the show to make sure that people like me, people who tell the truth, don't exist. And it's only the mainstream conservative talking points out there that exist on the conservative side. So make sure to support the show. P.O. Box 3492, My Patriot Supply, Subscribestar. Check out the links in the description below on Rumble, below every video, and we appreciate your support.